Hi, I'm Hannah, and in today's video we're going to be discussing and dissecting the entire An Ember in the Ashes series by Sabaa Tahir. This is intended to be non-spoiler, so the majority of this video is going to be talking about these 4 books, non-spoilers. However, I will have a small section at the end of the video for some spoilery thoughts. So let's talk about An Ember in the Ashes. So this series consists of 4 books, and the 4th book just came out in the middle of December. So the first book is An Ember in the Ashes, then it goes A Torch Against the Night, A Reaper at the Gates, and A Sky Beyond the Storm. Now this is classified as a young adult dystopian fantasy story, and so in this video I'm going to be breaking it down. So the first section I'm going to talk about is a summary of the overall plot. Then I'm going to get into the inspiration for the story, some real-world themes, and some inspiration for the series by the author. Then I'm going to be talking about some plot elements and some content warnings about this series. Then I'm going to do a deep dive into some of our characters, and then talk about the fantastical elements and the world building of the series, followed by a section on the romance, as well as a short discussion about books 2, 3, and 4 specifically. These are all going to be in a non-spoiler way. At the end of the video, I'm going to have some minor criticisms and some slight spoilers. In that section, I'm still going to be talking about things in a very vague way. However, I will flash up a spoiler warning for that section of the video if you want to know absolutely nothing about the series before you read it. And then at the very end, I will have a little conclusion section and talking about my overall feelings about the series and wrapping up this video. So this is going to be a rather long video. I'm going to be going fairly in depth for each of these sections I want to talk about. So grab a snack, grab a drink, and let's talk about An Ember in the Ashes. So first I'm going to get into a general plot summary for the series. Now this series follows 2 main characters in book 1. Our first character's name is Laya. Now Laya is a scholar and the scholars are a society based on Middle Eastern and Pakistani culture. And the scholars are a beaten down group of people. They have been conquered by a militaristic society called the Marshals, and they have been under the rule of the Marshals for 500 years. The Marshals are a brutal, Spartan-inspired, militaristic society that has perfected and mastered a special type of weapons technology. Any other blade crafted by the scholars just break upon impact with the Serric steel blades of the Marshals, which is how the Marshals have been able to dominate the continent and build an empire. Now at the beginning of the story, Laya's brother is kidnapped and her grandparents are brutally murdered in front of her by the Marshals. She is forced to join a resistance group in order to get their help to rescue her brother from prison. She infiltrates the military school as a slave to spy on the headmistress of the school, whose name is Commandant Karis Vichuria, to steal secrets for the rebellion, and in turn, the resistance will help Laya save her brother from prison. And then we have Elias, and Elias is not just a marshal, but he is a mask who is the top of the line, the most elite soldier in the martial army, and he absolutely hates it. We learn very early on in Elias's opening scene, he is gathering supplies and hoarding a cache of supplies in a future attempt to escape the military school. He does not want to be a part of the Marshals. He hates everything that they stand for, and he wants to get away. Elias was raised in the tribal lands with an adopted family, so this is why he has a different view of the Marshals as being sort of an outsider. However, when Elias was 6 years old, he was taken from his adopted family and brought to the military school to train as a mask because he is the bastard son of Karis Vichuria, who is the commandant or headmistress of the military school. Through a series of events, Elias is forced to stay at the school and compete in a series of brutal trials. The winner of these trials will be named Emperor of the Marshals, and the runner-up of these trials will become Bloodstrike. And Bloodstrike is a person who brutally enforces the Emperor's will, and this person is the second in command. So right from page 1, we have these two characters who immediately have tension. We have Laia, who is on a quest to help her brother escape prison, and we have Elias, who's trying to escape his fate as a martial soldier and compete in a set of trials. So that is the basic summary of book 1. That's kind of what you will see if you read the description on Goodreads. And now I'm going to talk about the inspiration for this story and real world elements and themes that Sabaa Tahir took from real life and integrated into her story. So Sabaa Tahir's family is originally from Pakistan, and that element of world building that she integrates from her family's history is integrated really well into the story. Like I said previously, the scholar nation is kind of based on a Middle Eastern or Pakistani culture. Sabaa Tahir was raised in the Mojave Desert of the United States, and that desert theme is also prevalent in book 1 as sort of a backdrop of the city that we are in. Throughout this first book, we really see the lore and the world building and the influence of the Muslim mythology and folk tales that Sabaa Tahir was taught or was told as a child by her mother, retelling these stories from her family from Pakistan, and you can kind of see how that influence is woven throughout the series. Sabaa Tahir also talks about how she was really close with her brothers, and they were raised, you know, they didn't have a lot of money, so the family unit is very close, and that is a theme throughout the series where, you know, sibling relationships, familial relationships are brought up again and again. We see this already through Laia's relationship with her brother and how willing she is to sacrifice herself and to put herself in this horrible situation at the military school and put herself at risk for the love of her brother. Sabaa Tahir is a former journalist, and her writing skills just shine in this series. I took this quote from NPR just to give you a little bit more of a background. And I'm quoting here, "She was signed to edit a haunting news story about women in India whose husbands, sons, and brothers had been disappeared by state police." So from a real world event, this inspires Sabaa Tahir to write about a fictional world in which this happened. This tragic and scary news story made her think about her family and her brothers and what it would feel like and what she would do to find them again. And that is something that shines through with this story, is it feels like a real thing that could happen. Because it does happen in the world, and that's why this story feels so real and raw, even if it is set in a fantasy realm. Fun fact, Paramount Pictures actually bought the rights to a movie series before book 1 was even published, so if that doesn't give a shining endorsement to the book, I don't know what does. This next section I'm going to get into is some plot stuff and some content warnings for what is in store if you should read this series. If you like action-packed stories, this is it. Like I said, from page 1, we feel that tension with our two main characters immediately. They have wants, needs, and desires, and there are clear and hard obstacles in their way preventing them from achieving those wants, needs, and desires. There's trials, there's espionage, spying, there's a rebel group, and an evil empire. There's love, betrayal. These are all buzzwords that I would use to describe this series, and all buzzwords that would draw me in and pique my interest in a young adult fantasy series. I will say this is a very violent book, and that is something I want to call out to maybe the younger YA reader. In the opening scene with Laia, her grandparents are murdered right in front of her, and in the opening scene with Elias, the commandant brutally whips a young student to death. So if that sets the tone for the entire rest of the book, you know right away from the beginning that this is a very serious very serious in tone, and it's going to be very violent. Now, I wouldn't describe the violence as gratuitous in my opinion, but that is something you would have to judge for yourself and your comfort level. Another content warning I want to bring up is there is discussion of rape and an attempted rape within the book. Now, the attempted rape in book 1 is very violent, and it is very clear what is about to happen. Now, I do want to say that the rape is stopped and that attempt is thwarted. However, it is still an element of book 1, and I just want everyone to know that before they pick it up. There's also an element in a later book where a character comments on the Marshall Society about how the Marshalls as a people do not accept same-sex couples. So this is kind of an aside, it's kind of a side comment, but it is an aspect of homophobia. And if that mention is going to, again, bother you, I would maybe steer clear of this. Although I do want to say there are no homophobic slurs or violence towards LGBTQIA+ people in this series. There is just that brief mention of how the Marshalls don't like same-sex couples. And the last content warning I want to talk about is there are some non-explicit sex scenes in later books, so that is something to be aware of when picking up this series. It is a little bit more serious, and I would say almost more adult in tone, more new adult even in tone and in content. So that was my content warning and some plot buzzwords that I wanted to talk about, and now I'm going to talk about some characters. So while this series is very plot heavy, there's lots of tension and lots of drama, this is very also character driven in my opinion. Sabaa Tahir is a master of making us feel empathy for all characters, including the bad guys, even the Commandant. Now, the Commandant is pure evil, but yet for some reason she is still a really compelling character. So I've already talked about our two main characters, Laya and Elias. We are also introduced to another character named Helene Aquila, and she is introduced in book 1 as a side character, but she gets her own perspectives in books 2 through 4. So and she is a character who is in the Empire. She is loyal to the Empire. So from her perspective, we get kind of the internal workings of the Empire, and Laya and Elias are on the opposite side, you know, on the rebellion. They don't like the Empire. So this perspective of Laya, Elias, and Helene allow for deep world building, and we get to see all the sides of the Marshalls and the Scholars, not just the good, not just the bad, but a mix of both. Through Helene's character, we see the internal politicking of the Empire and the scheming of the Commandant, which adds another layer of complexity to this already very interesting and complex story. The side characters feel complex and interesting and provide interesting foils and tension throughout the entire series, and we grow attached to them, and not all of them survive. Those are the characters, and now I'm going to talk about the fantastical elements and the world building. So everything I've said thus far doesn't make it sound like it's a fantasy, but there are fantastical elements within this series. In book 1, the fantastical elements are slowly introduced because both the Scholars and the Marshalls do not believe in magic. They don't believe in ghouls and ghosts. So when a ghoul pops up on page, the first reaction is it even there? Am I hallucinating? And so from the reader's perspective, we're not sure what is actually going on. So those fantastical elements are slowly introduced throughout the first novel and then greatly expanded upon in the rest of the series. So we have ghouls, jinn, ifrits, ghosts, and we have this mysterious jinn figure called the Nightbringer. And now I'm not going to get too much into the Nightbringer, but he is some kind of mysterious otherworldly being who will play a big role in books 2 and beyond. We are also introduced to humans having magical powers in book 1. However, it is, again, the character, who I won't say, but the character who discovers their magical powers feels like they have to hide them in order to, you know, pass and stay incognito. So through this magic system, we really start to see some of the folklore and mythological elements that I talked about earlier that inspired the story come into play. Throughout the books, we travel around quite a bit, and a lot of time does pass. From the beginning of book 1 to the end of book 2, about 2 years pass total. So through these travels, we do get to see a bunch of different cultures and different perspectives of what other cultures and nations think about the scholars and the marshals. So as I said previously, we have the tribes, who are Elias's people, and they are caravan people who travel around in groups of caravans. And we also get the Maren Nation, and through that nation we see this plot line with immigration, because we have, scholars fleeing the tyranny of the empire and arriving in a different country, and we get to see how that country is accepting or not of the immigrants into their cities. And this, to me, makes the world feel more realistic. It's not just these two opposing forces. The continent is huge, and there are all sorts of different types of people on it. So the traveling aspect really lends itself to deep world building and a complex world. So for me, I am a big fan of the world building in this series and the magical elements. You don't get a lot of magic in book 1, but if that is something that you also enjoy, it does become more prevalent in books 2 and on. Now stick with me for this next section, because we're going to talk about the romance in this series. And I'm going to say a bad word. The love triangle. Okay, before you click off this video and write this series off, let's talk about the romance and why the love triangle works for me. So first thing I want to say is Laia and Elias, when they first meet each other, have an instant attraction, an instant interest, but it is not instant love. So I feel like there can be instant chemistry between two characters, but I find it annoying when characters meet for the first time and they are willing to die for each other right away. They're instantly in love. That is not the case in An Ember in the Ashes. When Laia and Elias first meet, they are attracted to each other, but Elias is a marshal and Laia is a scholar, so she hates him. She's attracted to him, but she hates him for who he represents. He is a marshal. He is a soldier. He is of the people who murdered her family and kidnapped her brother. So that is an element that I really appreciate, that this romance between Laia and Elias doesn't start out as an instant love. It starts out as attraction and eventually blooms into something more and more as they get to know each other. Now, as for the love triangle, this is why I think it works, because it's centered around Laia and she is attracted to Elias, but she is also attracted to a particular resistance fighter, a member of the resistance. But she is attracted to these two men in different ways, which is why I think it works. So with the resistance fighter, they are similar in many ways. So they're both scholars, and this resistance fighter is her point of contact, who she's supposed to report to upon when she, finds out information from the commandant. She's supposed to report to this person. So he's kind of her lifeline and her link to the rest of the resistance. So she has to rely on him to pass along her information, but she doesn't quite trust him at the same time. Whereas on the other side, she is attracted to Elias because he's handsome and he keeps doing nice things for her and helping her out. However, he is a marshal, so everything in her head is telling her not to be attracted to him, not to find him interesting, and yet her heart is telling her maybe he's not so bad as she gets to know him more and more. So these two love interests feel equal in the triangle. Nothing bothers me more than when a love triangle is introduced and you immediately know who the main character is going to end up with. So that other character just feels like they've been thrown in to add unnecessary and unrealistic tension. And to me, that type of love triangle doesn't feel genuine. It doesn't feel like an actual love triangle. It feels like this is a couple and we're just gonna throw in this other person to add this weird tension and make the book last longer, to be honest. But in this series, that is not the case. The tension in this love triangle does feel genuine, and it does feel like Laia does care about the resistance fighter and Elias equally or in different ways. So as the series goes on, you truly don't know who she's going to end up with or who she's going to choose. Another thing I like about the romance in this series is as the series goes on, the obstacles keeping the romantic parties apart feel genuine and real. It feels like realistic obstacles and realistic tension keeping these two characters apart from each other. It doesn't feel contrived. Like, it doesn't feel like contrived tension just for the sake of adding tension. This is a pet peeve of mine. Like, for example, when a character is hiding a secret from their, love interests in order to protect them. This is one of the most boring forms of tension between a couple in a story, in my opinion, and I find it rather lazy. Like, find some other reason that is keeping these two characters apart that feels more real. And that's why the romance in An Ember of the Ashes is successful, in my opinion, because there are real reasons why these two cannot be together and real things that are coming in between them. It does not feel contrived at all, in my opinion. The other reason I like the romance in this series, because the romance is in itself an arc, and we get to see that, and their relationship as a couple is part of their character arcs. However, the two characters get their own individual growth and moments throughout the series. So we see them as a couple, but we also see them separate and how they have grown as separate people. And that's why I think the romance enhances the story instead of taking away from everything great about the characters and the story overall. Okay, so in this section, I'm going to be talking about books 2, 3, and 4 as their own entities, and this is still going to be in a non-spoiler way. So you are still safe to watch this section. I'm just going to be talking about how the books stand up on their own versus as part of a series. So book 2 has a fair amount of travel happening, and through this medium we get to see the world kind of explode and expand upon. So while it may not be the most exciting plot-wise, we are getting a lot of world building in book 2. We're also getting a lot of character building. Character relationships are developing and becoming even deeper. But I will say there is still a lot of action in book 2, and the climax of book 2 is very action-packed. So we're still getting a lot of elements from book 1 and into book 2, but there is that travel narrative. And in my opinion, travel stories just aren't as interesting or as fun as, say, in book 1, the trial competition aspect. But I think book 2 as a whole still stands up pretty well on its own. Book 2 is also where we are introduced to Helene's perspective, and through her eyes is when we start seeing a lot more politicking and a lot more internal strife within the Marshall Empire. We also get to know Helene a little bit better and start getting introduced to her internal struggles. And to be honest, Helene is my favorite character, so I like book 2 quite a bit because we start to get to know her better and understand what she's going through. So that's all I'll say about book 2. Book 3 has a lot more of the politicking within the Empire, as well as introducing another nation, and the other nation is taking advantage of the internal struggles of the Empire and is taking the opportunity to attack one of their port cities, which is a main plot line throughout book 3. In book 3, we also see a lot of the magical elements come into fruition, as well as a continuation of the romantic plotline and the rebellion plotline. If you are a fan of the Commandant, book 3 is, in my opinion, where she shines the brightest. We don't get her perspective, but we really get to see her plotting and planning and her evilness in book 3 quite a bit. So that's kind of why I enjoy book 3, and of course more Helene Laia and Elias doing their thing. Book 4 is where obviously we have to start wrapping some things up, but this is where the magic and the fantastical elements really shine. The plot of book 4 has a lot to do with the magic and the it has a lot to do with the magic and the mythology of this world. That is the main driving plot of book 4. And obviously we get to see the fate of all of the resolution of all of the conflicts that have been introduced throughout. I can honestly say that this concluding novel is one of the best conclusions to a young adult fantasy series I think I've ever read. A lot of series I read, usually I'm disappointed by the ending, or I have a very meh, that was okay kind of reaction to series enders. And in this instance, I feel like book 4 really ends well. With a story this brutal and violent, you just have a feeling that the ending is going to be bittersweet. And I feel like Sabata here pulls it off really well. There is hope and happiness at the end of the series. However, there is a lot of hurt and a lot of sadness and a lot of recovery that needs to be done for our characters. In general, I think each individual installment of the series does in fact stand up on its own, as well as being integral parts of a series as a whole. I think my favorite book in this series is still book 1, but overall I think each installment of the stories deserves a 4.5 or a 5 out of 5 star rating. Okay, so I do have some minor criticisms about this series, but that is getting into some spoiler territory. So while I will keep this next section as vague as possible, I will still have a spoiler warning on the screen for this section in case you do not want to learn anything at all about books 2, 3, and 4 going forward. And then at the end, I will be doing a non-spoiler conclusion of this video. So this is the minor criticism / minor spoiler section. So my first criticism is that there is a romantic subplot with Helene, and it starts in book 3. And my frustration comes in when Helene is denying herself this romantic interest, and her reasoning is, oh, it'll just be a distraction from my duties. So as a personal preference, this is not my favorite way of keeping two characters apart. It's just like, it just feels a little boring to me. It feels like contrived tension and, reason for us to just hold our breath a little bit longer with a romantic relationship. So that is just kind of a small things, but I don't like that in any sort of romantic subplot in any of my fiction. So if that's not going to bother you, then go for it. That starts in book 3. My next, minor criticism is that in book 3, so for the entirety of book 3, Elias is denying his duty. He is rejecting his duty for the entirety of the book. And then at the very end of book 3, he finally accepts what he's supposed to become and, grasps the mantle of what he's supposed to be doing. But then at the beginning of book 4, the other characters are like, hey, Elias, instead of doing your duty, you should come help us instead. And it just feels like a just kidding or a kind of a whiplash moment, because he had accepted his duty literally in the chapter at the end of book 3, and at the beginning of book 4, we're trying to reverse that decision. So it's not that big of a deal, but it is something that kind of bothered me about the construction of that character arc. My next criticism is Laia as a character. Now, I like Laia as a character, don't get me wrong, but I was, by book 3, I was starting to get kind of annoyed, not by her as a character, but by what was happening to her. Throughout the series, Laia does not have a lot of agency or control over her situation. Obviously, she's a scholar, she, becomes a slave, so she does not have a lot of control over her situation. And with that, she gets manipulated a lot, she gets tricked a lot, and she ends up doing things that she doesn't want to do. So in book 2 and 3, I was starting to get really annoyed with her getting pushed around by the other characters, and I was like, well, when is Laya gonna just stand up for herself and finally say, no, I'm gonna do what I want. With that being said, in book 4, she does start doing things on her own. She does kind of separate herself from the rest of the group and start taking control of her own situation and making her own decisions. So while her lack of control and her lack of agency bothered me, it does make sense for who she is as a character and how her character arc is developed. It was just kind of annoying for me. So Laya in general is a softer character, and I don't mean that in a negative way. She is not a warrior, she's not a fighter, but she does find her own strength and take comfort in the power that she does have. I do think overall she does have a strong character arc from beginning to end. However, I was just a little annoyed with how much she gets tricked and manipulated, and she doesn't really learn her lesson until maybe book 4. So just a small annoying thing for me. All right, I'm done talking spoilers. I'm just gonna conclude this video, and I have to say I genuinely love this series. I think that if you are an adult fantasy reader, I think this is a great YA fantasy series that adults would really enjoy. And also teenagers. It's one of those series that I think transcends its age group really well. You know, keeping in mind the content warnings I mentioned previously in the video. So overall, I really think this is a fantastic series, and I gave each installment of the series 5 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, and honestly, I just had minor criticisms, not enough to even knock off a half star for me. And I highly recommend this series for both adult and teen fantasy readers. So that was my An Ember in the Ashes series analysis, deep dive, review, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for sticking around with this one, and I would love to know your thoughts in the comments below. Now keep in mind, if you want to talk spoilers, please add a spoiler warning if you want to talk spoilers in the comments. But thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you again in my next video.